Ow. Hello everyone. I just finished this painting about 20 minutes ago. I was unhappy with it at first, if I'm being completely honest, but I think that it's fine. I've sat on it for a second and now it's kind of starting to grow on me. The only reason I was unhappy with it is because it looks so rough, but honestly, that's just kind of how I roll. Everything that I do looks rough at first, but it always kind of grows on me by the end, or after the end. Very few minutes after the end. Oh man, this is how it's gonna start, huh? So if you don't know, I really like Grace Ashcroft from Resident Evil 9. I haven't played the games, I've only watched people play it, but I really like the story, and I really like Grace's character. Probably because I relate too much to her, but that's a story for another day. Or I'll talk about, I want to talk about why I like her character so much later, but for now I'm just practicing painting her face. By the way, I do have a video idea for the future. I won't say exactly what it is yet, but it does have something to do with Leon. And it's no secret that Leon was crafted, and there is something about his eyes. I'm probably not even going to put this in the video. Why am I saying this? There's something about his eyes that really, that I kind of want to ramble about a little bit, because it's a pattern that I've noticed across the board. Anyway. Also, I have a really hard time with rendering women's faces. It's crazy. Drawing and rendering men's faces is so much easier for me than female faces, and it's just, it's interesting. And that is kind of what I want to talk about in the future. So, I want to get into oil paints eventually, and I have a few oil paints already, but I'm a little bit nervous to start just diving into oil paints without knowing anything about color. I mainly work with charcoal. I'm most familiar with charcoal, and that's monochrome, so I've never really worked with color before. Until this last weekend. The last video I did, I painted Grace, a different picture of Grace, and then by the end of that video, I painted this same picture of Grace. In that video, I didn't do any sketches. This time, I wanted to try to start with a sketch to see if I could get her likeness more easily with a sketch, and also to see if the painting process was a little bit easier with a rough sketch at the beginning. I didn't want to do the sketch too detailed. It ended up being a little bit detailed, but it's totally fine. When I actually, if I sketch on a canvas, a physical canvas, I probably won't do that much detail. Maybe. Who knows? We'll see. So I wanted to try to do a sketch to see if it would make it easier, or to see if I could maintain her likeness a little bit more than I did in the previous video, and also to see if I could make it not like a horror painting like I did in the last video. Granted, the last video those were my first two paintings ever. I mean, I painted as a kid, and I tried painting one picture about 10 years ago, but I gave up on that. So this is the first time I've actually taken color really seriously. So I'm practicing digitally because my brother lent me his drawing tablet. I already said all of this in the last video. I don't know why I'm reiterating. Anyway, I started with a sketch. It did make it a little bit easier to maintain her likeness, or to get her likeness a little bit. But the trick is that I actually have to get her likeness with the sketch. So that was a little bit tricky, and I had to adjust a lot. I was trying not to use the eraser. And here's the thing about the restrictions I've been putting on myself. It might sound silly for me to say, that I'm not using the undo button or an eraser without really explaining why. I probably don't have to explain why, but here we go. I don't want to use the undo button or eraser too much, because once I start doing I'm practicing for physical oil paints, and there's no undo button there. So I don't want to get in the habit of, using the undo button. However, if I were just doing a regular painting, or like a painting specifically for the digital format, I would totally use the undo button and eraser, and I would take every liberty that is at my disposal. But with this, that's why I just put these restrictions on myself, because I'm just practicing for the traditional stuff. I tried not to use the eraser with the sketch, because that's kind of the habit that I've gotten into with like pencil. There's no other reason, really. I just, I don't know. It's kind of like I'm not a gamer and I never play games. And despite that, when I get into a game, every fiber of my being really wants to play it on the hardest difficulty, even though I know that I would not be able to make it through the hardest difficulty unless I just spent all my time. But it's just like, I just really want to prove that I could do it, but I can't. That's the thing. I completely bagged that restriction that I put on myself, and I used the eraser a lot because, as you can see, the face was not quite right. And I also expanded the canvas a little bit, something that you can't do with an actual canvas, but I did it anyway because I could. And as you can probably tell, I don't really have a method or a step-by-step process on how I draw a person's face. I just kind of get one reference point and then do all the angles from there. But it's really funny because you can probably tell how close my face was to the screen at certain points because the proportions were off. And the only reason that happened was because my face was really close to the screen, and then it was not close to the screen, and I would get references at different points, and my reference point was a little skewed. So it makes me realize that I have to stay in the same spot in order to get accurate proportions or make everything relative to each other more accurate. Anyway, so the sketch itself took about 30 minutes. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. But yeah, so I did it. I drew her face out first, added another layer, started to paint, and I tried to start with the darkest spots. I spent a day on it, and by the end of that day, I realized that her mouth was really close to her nose, and it looked more like Yvonne Strahovski than anything else. I told myself at first, if it looks like Yvonne Strahovski at first and not Grace Ashcroft, that is totally fine. But then I slept on it, and I was like, man, I really don't want it to look like a different person, because the whole point of this painting was to try to see if I could get her likeness at least a little bit. So I thought about it, I slept on it, and I was like, I'm gonna start over on the mouth. Not on the whole painting, just on the mouth. The biggest lesson that I learned from this painting was not to be afraid to start over. Things can just disappear without warning, and you can either panic or you could deal with what you got. I want to deal with what I got, so I have to practice with this tiny little painting thing. So the next day, I added another layer and I completely adjusted her mouth. And the reason it was so painful at first was because I really liked the colors that I used with the first iteration of the mouth. And I was really bummed because I really, really liked the way that the mouth looked. It was just the placement. And if this was just a digital painting for the sake of digital painting and not practicing for oil paints, I would have just cropped it out and adjusted it and, did it that way. However, I have told myself that I'm going to act as if this is traditional painting. So I started over completely. And by the end, I think I did fine. I really like the way the mouth looks right now. But that transition was a little bit tricky. Or it was painful. That's the thing. Never be afraid of starting over. That's my philosophy. What else did I do? Do I remember anything else that I did? The left side of the face was super, super difficult, the shadowed side. The colors on her face were kind of challenging to get because I could not tell if certain parts were more orange or more green. This whole picture is red and green and yellow and stuff, but there were a lot of parts that I couldn't actually tell if they were orange or green or, picking the color. What was trying to figure out if I wanted to pick a quote-unquote green or like a dulled orange from more of an orange standpoint or a red standpoint. That doesn't make any sense. Hopefully I'll illustrate that sufficiently. So yeah, the colors on her face were very, 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 very weird. Her hair, not so much. Her hair is a little more yellow, so that was okay. It took about 3 days, not constantly. I don't know, maybe it took about 10 hours. The second day was mainly spent on her mouth and her nose, and the third day, no. I did two sessions the second day, and I'm calling that day 2 and day 3. Interesting. The first session, the second day, which I'll call day 2, nose and mouth. The second session, the second day, which I'll call day 3, was her hair and the shirt. The shirt I was really not looking forward to because I did not know what in the world to do. And then today, which is actual third day, was the eyes. And I actually, now it's been about 45 minutes since I finished it, and it's growing on me. I could look at it closely and nitpick, but if I look at the thing as a whole, I'm pretty happy with it. All things considered, we're getting there. We're not quite there yet, but we're getting there. I already have the style that I want to achieve in my head, and I have that as a reference point, but nobody really knows what style I want. I mean, you could probably guess. Nobody has the exact reference point that I have, so me comparing it turns me into a bigger critic than anyone else that would compare it to anything. I don't know. Right now, I'm just talking to myself and trying to convince myself that everything's okay. We're getting there. And I'm having a lot of fun getting there. Maybe a few years into the future, I can look back on this and see how far I've come. Or maybe I'll be at the same spot. Who knows? Hopefully I'll improve. And I'm actually really looking forward to doing it physically, because the hardest part about painting digitally is changing the size of the brush and the angle of the brush, whereas when you paint traditionally, you don't really have to think about changing any settings. That's been the hardest part about painting this thing digitally, but I think transitioning over to traditional oil paints, the hardest part is going to be mixing the colors and, because it's oil paints, like trying to work with it on the canvas, because I have no idea how long oil paints take to dry, but the brushes and the angle of the brush and everything, that's probably going to be the easiest part. Not that any part of it is easy, but it's probably going to be an easier part than anything else. Anyway, I'm rambling, and I will end the video here before I really go off to the races. This is the second attempt at this particular reference. I'm going to do more. I'm just going to do these in bulk. Not actually in bulk, because I can't do it that fast. I'm just practicing for a bunch of different things. I just want to really practice on painting portraits, and I want to get efficient at it and comfortable with it enough so that I can work with physical stuff. So, there you go.